1 week before my son's divorce hearing, my daughter-in-law and my husband believed their secret was buried under polite breakfasts and weekend calendars. I poured coffee, nodded at small talk, and practiced a neutral smile until my cheeks ached. They didn't notice I'd turned their favorite word, rights, into a ticking clock of filings, notices, and receipts that would land on a polished conference table at exactly the right minute. You're watching Revenge Files. Subscribe for a new twist daily. The morning I found out wasn't cinematic. It was the sound of a dryer buzzer and the vanilla amber perfume that didn't belong to me. My son Caleb had spent the night at a friend's place after another argument with his wife Kelsey. My husband, Dean, claimed he'd fallen asleep in his den. I folded towels, set them on the couch, and watched his phone light up with a message preview that read, "Doors unlatched. 10 minutes?" I didn't confront him. I unloaded the dishwasher. I fed the dog. I watched the clock hit 6:10 a.m. and heard Dean's shower turn on, like nothing new had happened in our Cincinnati split level on Ridgeway Drive. He hummed along to an old rock song and asked, from the hall, if we were still meeting Caleb's lawyer at 2 on Friday. "Of course," I answered, steady. My voice sounded like a woman vacuuming a rug. The trick to surviving a blow is to keep your knees soft and your eyes open. Confrontation gives people time to lie. Silence lets them keep talking. Caleb married Kelsey 3 summers ago in a barn venue north of town that smelled like fresh paint and cut hay. We covered the catering deposit and the first month rent for their apartment above the hardware store on Maple Street. I thought they were building something. I didn't expect to be writing checks into a sinkhole. By New Year's, the sinkhole had a name, debt. Caleb worked second shift at a distribution center, a sturdy job with benefits. Kelsey was a home stager who loved velvet couches, brass lamps, and every neutral paint on earth. Her business, Room Remedy, had a white transit van, a storage unit, and an Instagram grid full of empty houses made to look like catalog pages. She was good at the surface of things. She was worse at invoices. They fought about late fees and missed deliveries. They fought about whose money was ours and whose was mine. In February, Caleb slept on our couch for 3 nights and cried the way men cry, quiet, with their faces angled away. He said Kelsey was threatening to take him to the cleaners. I told him to document everything. He kept receipts, emails, and a photo of the dent in the van she said he caused. He also kept hope like a bruise under a sleeve. I kept my own list. First item, the $9,500 we had fronted for Kelsey's inventory last summer, pail, rugs, framed prints, 3 fake fiddle leaf figs. I had the canceled check with inventory loan on the memo line in my careful handwriting. Second, the $2,000 I'd paid the storage facility at her pleading on August 3rd. Third, the $4,200 deposit we'd covered on their rental when they moved out of Maple Street and into a bungalow nearer to us, because the landlord insisted on double. 1 week before the first mediation, Caleb told me the date, March 18, and the time, 9:30 a.m., and the location on Court Street where the law offices sat with coffee machines that hissed and a front desk that smiled without teeth. He said, "Kelsey's lawyer is tough, Mom. She says Ohio is equitable distribution and I don't get to keep what's fair, just what's argued." I nodded, and then I asked the one question he wasn't expecting, "Do you want me there?" He looked tired. "They'll say you have no rights." "That's fine," I said. "I can sit." Except sitting was never the plan. The moment I smelled the vanilla amber that morning and watched Dean's phone light up, I marked a line on my list. 1 week. I didn't accuse him. I didn't move out. I baked muffins, left the plate on the counter, and drove to the Hamilton County Recorder's office with every receipt I could gather in a stiff manila folder. The clerk had gray hair and readers on a chain. "What you recording?" "UCC1 financing statement," I said, and my hands didn't even shake. My name on the filer line. Debtor, Room Remedy Staging LLC. Collateral, all inventory, furniture, decor, and equipment kept in Unit 317 at Central Lock Storage, and any after-acquired inventory. Under security agreement date, July 14th of last year. The agreement wasn't fancy. 2 pages and my signature next to Kelsey's in blue ink we'd signed standing on my kitchen island. I'd insisted on it when I wrote that $9,500 check. I saw it then as a formality, now it was a lever. The clerk stamped the filing at 11:08 a.m. and slid the confirmation across. "That'll be $12. I paid cash and walked to my car with the paper warm from the machine. My phone buzzed. A text from Dean. Want me to pick up Ty tonight? The message thread above it, set to silent, had Kelsey's initials. I locked my screen and drove to the storage facility next. Central lock sat behind a chain-link fence the color of rain. The manager, a man with a Reds cap and an 11 a.m. energy drink, pulled up Kelsey's unit. She's late, but not over the lien threshold, he said. 3 days before we issue notice. Can you note my security interest? I asked. We don't really. I have the recorded UCC, I said, and placed the paper on the counter like a badge. He read. He frowned. He photocopied. On his terminal, he clicked a thing that left a note with my name and number and a red flag. If there's a default, he said, you'll be contacted. Email me every invoice, I added, and wrote my address clearly. He shrugged and did it. Some doors open when you act like you belong there. I promised myself one day to cry. I promised myself the next day to breathe. But the week between discovering the affair and the meeting belonged to planning. If grief is an ocean, leverage is a dock. That afternoon I drove to the county auditor's site and printed property card records for the bungalow on Winton Road. Titling told me what I suspected. The lease was in Kelsey's name alone because she'd handled the move while Caleb was on overtime. That meant he had rights as an occupant, but the paper trail for deposits and pet fees, a heavy golden retriever named Moose, would show who'd paid what. I collected bank statements and pulled 3 Zelle screenshots where I transferred Kelsey emergency money with clear notes. Storage, repay by sept, van tires, urgent, rugs delivery, loan. At home, I sent a letter to Kelsey by certified mail. It wasn't a threat. It was a ledger, amounts, dates, and a final sentence that read, per the security agreement dated July 14th, collateral may be seized upon default. I printed one for her lawyer, whose name was on her Instagram, a proud post beneath a boomerang of courthouse steps. Dean came home at 6 with pad thai. He kissed my cheek, light and guilty, and asked about my day. Errands, I said. You? Inspections, he said, like he had all year as a building inspector for a neighboring township. His phone face down, he set the table. Moose thumped her tail, and I spooned rice. Somewhere in town, Kelsey scrolled her divorce scripts and posted a story of a farmhouse dining table with 8 mismatched chairs. Dean took a call outside under the excuse of poor reception. The sky pinked and then went black. 2 days before mediation, I visited Caleb's lawyer, a young woman with precise suits and hard shoes named Aria. I laid out receipts and emails and asked plain questions. Does adultery matter? Cincinnati is not Nashville. Ohio is not North Carolina. She shook her head. Not for dividing property, but proof of waste or dissipation might. Why? Curiosity, I said, and kept my stomach still. The coffee on her credenza tasted like pennies. What you have matters more, Aria said, tapping the UCC filing. If she runs a business using that inventory, your perfected interest is leverage. If she wants the business clean in the decree, she pays you or gives up the stuff. I want my son safe, I said. That's not a legal term, she said, then softened. It's a goal. Sometimes leverage gets you closer, but then... Sitting in my car after, my phone buzzed with a notification from our joint credit card that Dean and I never used except for emergencies. A $682 charge at a boutique hotel downtown, dated last night, 11:43 p.m. The card was in his wallet. He'd told me he was reviewing an after-hours permit. The charge description read, Riverlight Hotel, room, incidentals. I took a picture of the charge screen. I didn't forward it to anyone. I opened my notes and added one more line under the word rights. You can spend your way out of dignity faster than you can earn your way back into it. The morning of mediation felt like a job interview I didn't apply for. I wore a navy dress and low heels and carried a black leather bag heavy with paper. Inside, the UCC filing, the certified copy receipts, a printout of a letter from the storage facility confirming the arrears had rolled into default that morning after they ran billing. Also inside, a letter I drafted for Stripe, Kelsey's payment processor, notifying them of a potential ownership dispute over collateral underpinning the business and a copy of Kelsey's pricing guide that featured photos of our furniture, a use that I, as secured party, disputed. Payment processors hate disputes. They freeze accounts to avoid being dragged into court. At 9:22 a.m., I walked into the lobby and told the receptionist my name. "You're here for Moreno v. Moreno?" she asked, cheerful, and ushered me to a conference room with a view of Court Street. A bowl of wrapped caramels sat in the center of the table. The chairs squeaked. Caleb's knee bounced under the table. He squeezed my hand once and then stared at the door. Kelsey arrived in a cream blazer with a gold chain and that perfume I now could pick out of 100. She placed her phone face up as if it were a mirror and forced a smile at me that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. Dean arrived behind her, a step too close, carrying an envelope like a shield. When our eyes met, he flinched. Kelsey's lawyer swept in, mid-40s, crisp bob, polite voice sharpened to a point. She set down a leather folio and a legal pad and said, "Before we begin, I just want to note for the record that Mrs. Moreno," she meant me, "is not a party and has no legal rights in this proceeding. She's welcome to observe, but she is not to interrupt, instruct, or otherwise participate." The mediator, a man with kind eyebrows and a lapel pin shaped like scales, nodded along. "That's correct. Observers don't speak. We're here to help the spouses resolve property and care issues, not involve third parties." I smiled. I opened my bag. Actually, Kelsey's lawyer added sweetly, "If she could take a different seat away from the table, that would be—" I set a file folder on the table. The top document wore the seal of the Hamilton County Recorder. Under it lay the letter from Central Lock Storage. Beside it, the striped dispute draft addressed to a compliance team email with the subject line, "Ownership dispute. Request temporary freeze pending documentation." For a second, no one breathed. Paper can change air pressure. "What's that?" Kelsey asked. The lawyer picked up the UCC copy and pressed her lips together. "Where did you get this?" "I filed it," I said evenly. "In July, when I loaned room remedy money for inventory. It's a security interest in all staging items in Unit 317. As of 8 this morning, the unit is in default. Notice has been sent. If we don't have payment by close of business, the collateral can be seized." Caleb exhaled like he'd been underwater. The mediator cleared his throat. "We can note the existence of outside claims, but—" "There's more," I said, and slid the stripe letter forward. "If we intend to transfer the business cleanly in any decree, we need to clear the collateral and any competing claims. I've notified the processor. There's an ownership dispute over staged inventory used in marketing and delivered to clients." "You're bluffing," Kelsey said, color rising. "You can't freeze my business." "Your processor can," I said, "until proof is provided. They're cautious. They freeze with less." Kelsey turned to her lawyer. "Do something." "Sit," the lawyer said flat. Her eyes were reading the recorder stamp like a weather map. "Mrs. Moreno, regardless, this is a divorce negotiation. You do not have a seat at—" "Understood," I said. "I won't talk terms. I came to drop off documents so any agreement reflects reality. If your client wants room remedy free and clear, she pays the secured debt and the arrears. If she wants to walk away, she signs a transfer of the business name and releases Caleb from any claims." Kelsey laughed. "Too hard, too fast. You loaned me that inventory because you wanted to help. You said it was like family. You can't just switch and be a bank." "I was family until last Thursday," I said quietly. "Now I'm a secured party." Dean made a sound like a cough and a plea. "Dana?" I kept my eyes on the table. When Kelsey's lawyer started to object again, I set down the last envelope. It wasn't for the mediator. It was for the shred of illusion still trying to hold the room together. I had hired a licensed private investigator 2 days after the Vanilla Amber morning, not to follow anyone around alleys with a zoom lens, to pull hotel guest logs accessible through public sources, confirm charges, and, if lawfully available, capture lobby footage. The investigator, a woman with soft eyes and a hard routine, had delivered still images at 7:15 this morning. My husband and my daughter-in-law sharing an elevator at the Riverlight at 11:52 p.m. Laughing, not touching, but close enough to collapse the ground under my feet. There's nothing illegal in that image. There's only truth. "I don't need to show this to the mediator," I said, and slid the 3 photos into the middle like playing cards. "Or to the court. I'm not here to shame anyone on the record. I'm here to stop pretending." Kelsey's hand flew to her mouth as if her jaw were unhinging. Dean went paper white. Caleb stood so fast his chair skidded and hit the glass wall with a soft clang. The mediator whispered, "Let's take a minute." The receptionist popped her head in, wide-eyed. Somewhere far away, the coffee machine hissed. Everyone stood up, screaming. Not words, not language, just that raw sound people make when they shake off a mask. Kelsey said it's not what it looks like. Then it was just once. Then you weren't supposed to be there, the way a person changes stories mid-breath when the floor keeps moving. Dean grabbed the back of a chair, then the door handle, then nothing. Caleb didn't say a word. He just breathed in and breathed out like a man pushing a bar off his chest. The mediator did his job. He separated the parties into rooms. He kept me with Caleb. He took Kelsey and her lawyer and, after a beat, Dean into the other room. The conference center swallowed sound. The caramels sat untouched in their bowl. Caleb pressed his knuckles into his eyes and whispered, "I was going to say yes to almost anything today to just be done." "You don't have to," I said. "You still get to be fair. Fair is different now." Arya arrived 10 minutes later in crisp black and took in the spread with a quiet nod. "Well," she said, "that clarifies the temperature." "Do I get to keep my tools?" Caleb asked, like a kid asking about a dog in a fire. He meant his camera, his laptop, the things he used for freelance product photos. He meant his spine. "You do," Arya said, "and we're going to do more than that." The next 2 hours were the opposite of dramatic, which is how real power often looks. Numbers, dates, and lines. The mediator moved back and forth carrying offers on yellow pads. Arya anchored to the UCC. Kelsey's lawyer tried to write around it, offering a goodwill payment. Arya answered with the arrears total from the storage unit, a payoff amount for the secured debt, and a clean transfer of any claim to the business name to Caleb if Kelsey didn't want to buy the inventory outright. "Why would Caleb want the business name?" the mediator asked at one point, curious, not combative. "He doesn't," Arya said. "He wants leverage to make sure she doesn't use it to borrow off collateral she doesn't own. He won't run a staging business. He'll sell the name back for $1 if she pays the debt in full today." "Today's a bank day," I added, then closed my mouth and folded my hands. We were still impatient and let exhaustion do some of the work. In the other room, Kelsey recalculated her vision of herself. Dean faded into a corner, a man finally seeing his reflection after years of checking only angles. At one point, the mediator returned with a new wrinkle. Kelsey wanted assurance I wouldn't post anything online about the pictures. Arya handed over a draft mutual non-disparagement clause without looking at me. I signed it with a hand that didn't shake. The point of revenge isn't humiliation, it's relief. At 1:40 p.m., we had terms on paper. Kelsey would take her personal clothing, her personal laptop, and whatever furniture she could prove. She purchased with her own funds. She would abandon claims to Moose, part out from the transit van payment she'd kept insisting Caleb owed despite using the van for business jobs, and acknowledge the secured debt. She would pay $13,700 to satisfy my lien and the storage arrears by the end of the week, Friday, March 22nd, wired to my account per the payoff letter attached. If payment didn't hit by 5 p.m., the mediator would note that I would seize the contents of Unit 317 on March 25. She would release the name Room Remedy, and any social handles using it, to Caleb or his designee. She would receive no spousal support. Both sides would keep their own retirements and personal checking. Each would pay their own attorney fees. One problem: money doesn't appear because you put it on paper. Where is she going to get $13,700 by Friday? I asked after the mediator floated the terms across the table. Arya's mouth tilted half an inch. She knew the answer before I did. From the other room, a message returned. Kelsey had called her parents, the ones who'd paid for a nice rehearsal dinner and a honeymoon suite 3 summers ago. They weren't happy. They also weren't interested in watching a sheriff stand up at a storage auction on YouTube, which is where those things end. They would wire the money that afternoon if we could send banking instructions and a release upon receipt. Arya printed a payoff letter on the mediator's printer and handed it to me. "Routing an account," she said, and I wrote the numbers with a steady hand. I didn't ask for cash, I asked for a record I could frame. At 2:18 p.m., we reconvened in the big room. Eyes were puffy. Voices were quiet. The mediator read the terms into a small recorder. We initialed each page. When it came time for the mutual non-disparagement clause, Dean looked at me with a kind of desperate reach. "Dana," he said, too softly for anyone but me to hear, "can we talk at home?" "We can," I said, and signed my name. He was still my husband. Conversations have their own deadlines too. Caleb signed last. His hand hesitated over Moose and then moved on. He breathed out when the last page was done, like he'd been underwater for a season, and finally found a ladder. The mediator shook hands. Kelsey's lawyer pressed her client's shoulder. Kelsey blinked hard and stared at the caramels until her eyes cleared. Dean stood by the window with his hands in his pockets like a man in his own museum. The wire hit at 4:06 p.m. I know because my bank app pinged, and I read the numbers twice. $13,700 with a note, room remedy payoff. I forwarded the confirmation to Aria and to the mediator. He emailed back a PDF release I printed and signed and scanned with the receptionist's help. I also emailed Central Lock the proof of payment for arrears, copied the manager with the Reds, cap, and asked him to remove the red flag. He replied with a thumbs up. That's how victory often arrives, in small icons. Except, 2 nights later, a police cruiser rolled slow past the bungalow on Winton. The neighbor across the street had filed a complaint about commercial traffic at odd hours. Code enforcement left a bright orange notice on the garage, cease business use, $500 day fine if ignored. I hadn't called, I didn't need to. When a performance ends, the props look strange in daylight. Kelsey moved into a smaller apartment near the river with a balcony that faced a brick wall. She rebranded under her maiden name and posted pictures of white couches and bare mantels. Her new bio read, curated spaces, fresh starts. That's the thing about the internet, there's a filter for everything. I kept my promise and said nothing. Caleb got 3 extra shifts and then a promotion to lead. He joined a pickup basketball league at the Y on Saturdays. He planted tomato starts in 5-gallon buckets behind our shed and built Moose a ramp so her hips wouldn't hurt. He slept to the end of a night without jolting awake. Dean moved into the guest room. He said he'd slept in that den because the couch was comfortable and he didn't want to wake me when his shows ran late. He said the elevator pictures were a misunderstanding, a coincidence, 100 words that bent themselves into the shape of an apology and then fell apart. I listened like a judge. We went to counseling the next week and the next. I told the truth even when my throat burned. He did too, eventually. Truth doesn't fix a thing. It just stops a thing from moving. On April 30th, we stood before a magistrate in a small courtroom where the carpet had softened under thousands of shoes. The magistrate looked at the mediated agreement and at both lawyers and at Caleb and Kelsey's faces. He asked basic questions to make sure no one had been forced and everyone understood. He signed, dated, and handed back the final decree at 10:11 a.m. The clerk stamped it with a satisfying thump. The order noted 0 spousal support, divided property as agreed, and attached my payoff release as Exhibit B. It also included a notation on the transfer of room remedy to Caleb's designee and an acknowledgement of secured debt satisfied. I folded the decree into my bag like a letter from an ancestor. Outside the courthouse, the sky was clean and a little cold. Caleb hugged me and said, "You didn't have to do all that." "I wanted to," I said. "Wanting and having are different things. Did you know?" he asked. He meant about the elevator. He meant about the week before and maybe months before, the months I'd been sleeping beside a man who'd learned how to exist in half light. I knew enough, I said, honest. I knew exactly how much I'd need to know to stop being gentle. He laughed once, a sharp sound that turned into something warmer. He scratched Moose behind the ears and she sat, patient and loyal, waiting to see which way we'd walk. I mailed a copy of the decree to Central Lock. I mailed another to Stripe, closing the dispute. I sent a thank you note to the storage manager with a gift card for a local barbecue place because sometimes gratitude matters as much as leverage. I cleaned my black leather bag and put it back on the closet shelf. It smelled faintly of paper and citrus hand sanitizer. On May 9th, I received a certified letter addressed to me in Dean's careful block print. Inside, he had handwritten a few paragraphs, the kind you rewrite twice before addressing the envelope. He said he'd rented a small apartment on Kenwood and was giving me space. He said he would keep paying his part of the mortgage and the utilities and the dog food. He said he would be at counseling on Wednesdays even if I wasn't. He didn't ask me to forgive him. He asked me to take my time. Sometimes love sounds like a person stepping back while the house stops shaking. The next Saturday, I stood in my backyard and watched Caleb stake tomato cages. He measured the distance between buckets with a tape so the plants wouldn't shade each other out. He looked like a man who'd learned something quiet about how to build structure and weight. He looked like my boy again. 2 weeks later, Kelsey messaged me a single line that read, "I'm sorry." I stared at it a long time and then wrote back, "I'm glad you've got work," because that was true and it was all the space I was willing to offer. She didn't reply. That felt right. In July, the summer cicadas started up and you couldn't sit on the porch for 5 minutes without being wrapped in their electric saw sound. On a Thursday, I walked moose past the river light, past the valet stand, past the elevators inside that warmed glass lobby. They had a new display of local artists, bright abstract canvases. Nothing like my life. I paused. I didn't go in. I didn't need to. I had the thing I came for back in March and didn't know how to name yet. Here's the truth I finally settled on. Rights are a floor, not a ceiling. People will tell you what you don't have, what you can't say, where you can't sit. They will use the word observer like a muzzle, but the floor is solid if you build it yourself. A filed piece of paper is weight, a ledger is a spine. A woman can sit very still beside a bowl of caramels and change the whole temperature of a room. I didn't keep the pictures. I kept the receipts. I didn't destroy anyone's life. I insisted on my son's. When I fall asleep now, I still sometimes hear the dryer buzzer and smell vanilla amber like a ghost that forgot to move on. But then I hear the deeper sound. The stamp of a clerk's seal, the scrape of a chair as someone stands, the zipper of a leather bag opening. I see a room where everyone stood up screaming because truth hates a quiet entrance. I didn't need to shout. I just had to be ready when the clock hit 0 and the documents touched the table, and when I close my eyes, I go back to the opening image of that week. Me at my kitchen sink, hands in warm water, face neutral, heart awake. That's still how I live, measured, steady, and ready to turn the smallest piece of paper into a door.